These are by far the best supplements that I have seen to really help improve motivation, especially when I see with my ADHD patients. These are the ones that I've narrowed down that work time and time again. But why they do work is another story. And that has to do with really investigating what is the specific things that are contributing to your lack of motivation. And so when I do lab testing, these are the things that I see creep up over and over again. And I want to start with the biggest ones. And that has to do with norepinephrine and also epinephrine, which is the breakdown of dopamine. So it's really important because these things do contribute to motivation a lot. In fact, with epinephrine, I have found that 99%, and I've run these tests over the years, and across the board, about 99% of people, my ADHD patients, tend to be low in epinephrine. About 60% are usually low in norepinephrine. So what is a supplement that can be really helpful for improving this? Because when you don't have a good amount, like this patient right here, when they're low, it's really hard to have drive and motivation and focus because this helps manage stress, and stress impacts motivation a lot. And so one of my favorite ones that I love using is L-theanine. Now, why L-theanine? Because L-theanine helps improve norepinephrine and epinephrine, and also dopamine, also serotonin, which we'll get into more here later. But L-theanine, also what it does, it helps improve alpha brainwave activity. Now, what is alpha brainwave activity? Well, there's several different brainwave activity that we do have, and being in a more alpha brainwave state helps you have that more clear, focused mind. It helps eliminate distraction, and you're more in a calm state. And so that's where you want to be, especially if you want to be more motivated and driven and focused. Okay. So as far as like the dosages, now this is going to vary from person to person, but typically I will start people off with about 200 to even all the way up to 500 milligrams twice a day. Now, it depends on the severity of how much we want to use, but that is usually a good starting point when it comes to L-theanine. Now, another supplement that I like to do to help with motivation when it helps with both norepinephrine and epinephrine is Rhodiola. Now, Rhodiola has been proven to help improve not only with stress, but improving norepinephrine and epinephrine levels. Now, in this case, typically I will recommend anywhere from about 100 to 300 milligrams a day. Sorry, I'm kind of in the way right there. Now, taking this a step further, what about dopamine? Yes, dopamine is still important to address, especially when it comes to motivation and drive. And so what you want to be focusing on here is this right here, L-dopa. So L-dopa directly helps modulate dopamine. Now, when we see that, when it's low, one of the things I like to use is Mucuna Purines. Now, I'm not tied to any of these brands. I just grabbed different images of different bottles. But Mucuna Purines is one that has some L-dopa in it that's going to help improve dopamine. But we want to test first, because if you do have elevated levels of dopamine, it can make things worse. So you want to be careful here. This is why testing is important. It's why you want to be working with someone that's managing your prescriptions and managing your supplementation if you're going to be doing that. Now, as far as the dosage, I forgot to mention on the dosage on this one. So with this one, typically I will recommend anywhere from about 200 to about even all the way up to 800 milligrams a day. Now, again, it's going to depend on the severity, and you got to be careful with this, especially if you are taking Adderall, Ritalin, any kind of ADHD medication. Sometimes I might not recommend this unless I do see that your levels of dopamine are still low, even on your ADHD medication. Okay. So that's just something, a caveat there that you want to be careful about when it comes to supplementing something like this. Now, another thing that also is overlooked. So we've talked about epinephrine, we've talked about norepinephrine, we talked about dopamine, L-dopa, but what about here? It's part of the dopamine pathway, and therefore it definitely still impacts motivation when you are deficient in it, just like how this patient was. They were low on both phenylethylamine and also tyrosine levels. So when we look at this, we want to make sure we are supplementing for that as well, because these supplements can be very impactful when it comes to improving motivation, and especially when you're low in it. And so what I usually like to use is N-acetyltyrosine. It's one that's easier, more absorbed. And when I dose this, it's going to be anywhere from about 300, even all the way up to sometimes 1,500 milligrams a day. Just depend again on the severity of the case, but that's typically what I will typically recommend. Now, what about, so we talked about tyrosine, but what about phenylalanine? Now, that one is another amino acid that helps support the excitatory neurotransmitter known as phenylethylamine, which helps with this whole process. If you are low in phenylethylamine, like this person right here, it most certainly will impact your motivation for sure. So, in this case, I will recommend adding D-L-phenylalanine, the amino acid. This is an essential amino acid. And I will usually recommend anywhere on this one. It's going to really kind of depend on also the severity, but anywhere from about 1,000 to even to 2,000 milligrams twice a day. Okay. Now, another one that I also will recommend if there's an issue here, especially when phenylethylamine levels are low, is just directly actually supplementing phenylethylamine. So I usually will do both sometimes in some cases, but it just depends again on the severity, how much needs to be addressed on that. But typically with this one, I'll recommend anywhere from like 100, even all the way up to 500 milligrams a day. Okay. Now, but sometimes that might be a lot for some people. So what I will do, especially if they are low in both phenylethylamine, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and dopamine, then I will recommend a combo. I don't always recommend combos, but unless it makes sense. So I do like Dopatone Active because it does have DL-phenylalanine and L-tyrosine in it. It does have phenylethylamine in it. It also has the activated form of vitamin B6, which is important for building and modulating these different neurotransmitters. As you can see, P5P is right here, right here, right here, right here. So it's important to have activated form of vitamin B6 to help build and modulate every one of these steps. So this is why I like this combo, because it has everything that I do need if the person is low in every single one of these areas that we just talked about. So that will usually be my go-to. I don't always use combo because sometimes in combos, they can be contradicting of what I need the patient to be taking, or they have elevated levels and it has one ingredient there that they're already elevated in. And so it kind of throws things off. So if it makes sense, then I will recommend something like this. But this one is very powerful. And I've seen it time and time again with my patients where it definitely improves motivation, drive when they're deficient in every single one of these areas. Now, another area that is probably not thought of because we always think about dopamine, but there's other different neurotransmitters that do impact motivation, and that especially serotonin. So when you have low serotonin levels, you might just think, okay, yeah, you're depressed, but it also impacts motivation and drive. You might have a hard time getting out of bed. It also impacts motivation and drive. So when someone has low serotonin, just like this patient did, usually the case is going to be implementing either 5-HTP or L-tryptophan, depending on if their tryptophan levels are low. But in this case, I want to just talk about 5-HTP because 5-HTP helps make serotonin. And so I will usually recommend 5-HTP, helps with motivation, drive, improving those serotonin levels. Okay. Now, in this case, like honestly, like, you know, as far as when it comes to 5-HTP, you got to be careful if you're taking other different medications. So for example, sometimes if you're taking Adderall and you're doing too much 5-HTP, it kind of can decrease the effects of Adderall, or can also if you're taking like an SSRI. So you got to be careful if you're taking a medication. Always keep in mind when you're taking a medication, you need to be working with a prescribing doctor or doctor to helping you out. Now, I do this with my patients, clients. If you want to work with me more directly, again, there's a link in the description to book a consultation, your first appointment with me, if you want more specific help from me on this. So the 5-HTP, usually I will recommend anywhere from about 50 to about, in some cases, all the way up to 600 milligrams a day. Now, again, this is going to be based off of labs to determine the range of how much we want to be implementing. And if you are taking other different medications too. So there's a lot to keep in mind about this, to be careful about. Now, one other additional thing that is probably impacting your motivation and drive a lot that is probably overlooked in the ADHD community, especially adults with ADHD, is cortisol. So cortisol is what gives us energy. And when you don't have energy, it's hard to have enough motivation and drive throughout the day. And when you're an adult, this tends to happen. I see this time and time again with adults with ADHD as they reach this complete physical and mental burnout state. And so just like this patient, their cortisol levels are too low or they're spiked. So when you have too high of cortisol levels, it means you're very stressed. It's going to impact your motivation and drive. But if they're too low, you don't have enough energy. So you want a nice balance, have everything in the green. So what I usually will supplement for this, when it comes to when there's low cortisol levels, I'll use either adrenal bovine, adrenal desicate of some kind, and have them take it in the very first thing in the morning. And then I love using Cortisol Manager because it has a few things that help lower cortisol, which is, excuse me, is ashwagandha and magnolia. Both of these are really powerful in helping lowering cortisol. So I'll have them take it those specific times that we do see that their cortisol levels are spiking. Okay. Now, this is a lot of different supplements. Obviously, you're not going to be taking all these different supplements to help them with motivation, but picking the right ones based off of your lab testing can make all the difference in finally having that drive and motivation, that focus that you're looking for with your ADHD. But it requires investigated lab work, as you see with all these different case studies. And so if you would like, me to order these labs for you and to find the root cause of your lack of motivation and drive, I'd love to help you out. You can just click on that link, excuse me, in the description below, that you can book your first appointment. If you want me to help you order these and work with you more directly to help with your ADHD, then you just click that link in the description below. And so again, like I said, it's just a 45-minute one-on-one personalized strategy session with me, and it's in the description below. And I'd love to help you out. But thank you guys so much for attending from live stream. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks. Bye.